Hi, my name is Christy. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be taking you through all of the books I read in 2023. We're going to do a little bit of a wrap up today, but not only that, I'm going to do something a little bit different. If you know me, you know that I'm a massive Taylor Swift fan, a little bit of a swiftie if you will. So I'm going to be not only giving you my rating of each of the books, but I'm also going to be relating each book to the most relevant Taylor Swift song that I think encapsulates what the book is about. So let's get into it. Okay, so I wrote a list on my phone of all of the books that I've either read or listened to this year, either physical form or on my Kindle or on Audible or an audiobook service. And I've written down the ratings of each of the books and what Taylor Swift song I think relates most to either the plot or the characters or just the general vibe of the book. So the first book I read, I actually listened to on Spotify, so it was an audiobook, and that was Britney Spears' The Woman in Me. And I was a massive Britney Spears fan growing up, so I was really excited to read or listen to this book. Unfortunately, it did fall a little bit flat for me. It was basically a memoir, and the book itself was written by a ghostwriter, so it wasn't actually written by Britney Spears herself, which I know is quite commonplace for memoirs, but I did kind of feel like we didn't get a lot of substance out of the book. It was a bit of just a retelling of what we already knew about the conservatorship. We didn't get a lot of new information about the conservatorship itself. It did give us a little bit more information on her relationship with Justin Timberlake and I guess what led to the downfall of that relationship, but I wanted more juice in terms of the conservatorship and how that all came about and how it really made her feel. And I just don't feel like we got that, so that's why I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. Now, the Taylor Swift song that I think most relates to this book is from the album Folklore, and the song is called Mad Woman. And I think this mostly relates because if we think about Britney Spears' I don't know, history or story, it's really about her just being used by her family and by the media and really just having to be a bit of a showgirl and not really being able to have her own voice in terms of, I guess, her life and her performances and everything like that. So that's why I think Mad Woman most likely relates to that book. The next book I want to talk about is the last book in a very popular series called A Court of Thorns and Roses. I read A Court of Silver Flames at the start of this year and I really liked it. This whole series is just like a great first step into fantasy, and I feel like if you haven't read a fantasy book before, if you're more of a romance reader, you might really like this series because it's definitely fantasy, but it's definitely more romance rather than fantasy. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. Now, for this book, I actually wrote it. I actually rated it 4 stars. I was it did take me a really long time to read, but I was really happy with the plot and the characters, and I just felt like you got really swept away in the world, which I really loved. And the song that I think relates most to this book, or specifically Nesta, the main character, is Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift, because Nesta is not your typical, I don't know, main character. She is not very likable. She makes decisions that hurt other people. She has had a really tough upbringing, but she works against herself for a lot of the book, and you really see that in her relationship with Cassian. And that's why I think that Anti-Hero most represents Nesta in the book, because she is not the most likable character, but you still kind of like her anyway, regardless of all of the bad things that she does. And that really segues us into the next series that I want to talk about. So this series is the Throne of Glass series, which is another series by Sarah J. Maas that I started this year. And this has definitely been a standout for me. I'm so obsessed with the characters. I'm so obsessed with the storyline and just the twists and turns that come about in this book. I think I gasped audibly many times while I was reading this. So all of these books have my heart, but I did give them all different ratings, so we'll go through that together. Okay, so the first book in the series is Throne of Glass, and I rated this one 4 stars. So this was my first introduction into this whole series, and I know that there is a prequel to this book, Assassin's Blade, which I have not read yet, but the start of this series really just world builds, gets you into the mindset of Selena Sardothian, who is our main character, and she is just like the most badass main character I've ever met in my life. She really is just out there, you know, taking the world by storm. And I think this book most relates itself to The Archer by Taylor Swift. And that is because not only is she an assassin who uses a bow and arrow, but she is also just a very misunderstood person who, even though she is quite strong and resilient and a bit of a badass, she really has just like a heart of gold and just wants to love. And I feel like that definitely reflects The Archer's lyrics and the message, and yeah, that's why I relate it to The Archer. The second book in the series is Crown of Midnight. Now, I didn't love this one as much as I loved Throne of Glass. It was just a little bit more world building, and I guess the side characters had a bit more of a story in this book. I did still love it, but I definitely didn't give it as high of a rating. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. Now, I really struggled with a song to relate to this book, but I think Castles Crumbling by Taylor Swift is probably the most relevant, because there's just a lot of heartache that goes on in this book. There's a lot of I guess lying and mistrust, and a lot of, I guess, things falling apart. So I think that's why it relates most to Castles Crumbling. Now, this is where it starts to get exciting. This book, Heir of Fire, is where my, I guess, excitement for the series really grew, and I could not put this down. I loved this book. I rated this 5 stars. It was my first 5-star, I think, of the year, and it's the perfect book. Like, it's a chunky boy. This book here is 550 pages, and it did not feel like it. Like, I just wanted to keep reading and reading and reading. I actually maybe have the same song title for this one as well. Because I have the attention span of a goldfish, and obviously I did not proofread my list. But this one is also Castles Crumbling, but it is very fitting because she loses one of her best friends in this book. It's where everything starts to turn to shit and she has to flee. And yeah, that's why this one is also Castles Crumbling. And that takes us to the last book in the series that I'm up to. There are, I think, 3 more books in this series, but this was the last one that I read this year. And Queen of Shadows, I also gave 5 stars. This book is where everything starts to turn around. At the end of the last book, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there is a massive plot twist, and you realize who this main character is and the effect she's going to have on the rest of the world. And she also meets who is possibly the love of her life, Rowan. And the song that I think is going to best fit this is Long Story Short by Taylor Swift, because it's all about all of the people who she's been with and all of the experiences that she's had up to today. And it's a long story, but to cut it short, none of that matters because she met Rowan and they are a match made in heaven and they're so perfect for each other. So the next book I read was part of my book club book of the month, and it was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. And this book I actually really liked when I first read it, and then the more I reflected on it, the more I realized it was actually really cringe. But that's okay, I enjoyed it at the time. At the time I gave it 4 stars, reflecting probably more like a 3-star read. It was very predictable and a lot of the plot twists aren't very believable, so it was more like shock value rather than something you actually thought was gonna happen. The song that I think most reflects this book is Look What You Made Me Do. And the reason being is that within this book, the main character's actions throughout the book are really a reflection of the owners of the house that she is housemaiding for. Housemaiding, I don't know if that's a word, but anyway. So she wouldn't have made the decisions that she has made in this book without, I guess, the impact or the influence of the people she's surrounded with. So that's why Look What You Made Me Do is the perfect song for this book. The next book I want to talk about is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So this is the prequel to the Hunger Games series, and it's all about the backstory of Corey, how do you say his name? Coriolis. It's all about the backstory of President Snow. I can never say his name, so we're just going with President Snow. And the rating that I gave this book is 5 stars. I loved this book. I thought it was very well written. It was the perfect amount of information about the backstory behind President Snow, and I really liked how you were kind of in his head for most of the book, so you kind of understood why he was making the decisions that he made. And the Taylor Swift song that I think most reflects this book, and the only one I can really think of, is It Over Now by Taylor Swift. And it's really just because of that TikTok that went around talking about the lyrics, specifically the lyrics, when you lost control, red blood, white snow, President Snow, and he loved red roses and white roses. Blue dress on a boat, your new girl is my clone. And that is all I need to say. The next book that I want to talk about is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now, I've read a few books by Emily Henry, and this is the best one that I've read so far. I still don't know if I'm a huge Emily Henry fan, because I don't know, I just don't think her books hit hard for me, and maybe that's just because what they're written about isn't something that I can relate to. I'm not too sure. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it, so I gave this one 3.5 stars. And the Taylor Swift song that most reminds me of this book is Cruel Summer. This book is such a summer read, and it is all about a couple who are no longer together, and they have to pretend to still be together because their friends are getting married, and so they are all on this little vacation in the summertime together, and they don't want their breakup to be the main story that everyone's talking about. They want to just focus on their friends. So it's a cruel summer because the main character is still very much in love with her ex, but she can't show that. She just has to experience the summer with her friends, knowing that the love of her life is there next to her, but they're not together anymore.
Is that just the movie Anyone But You, or what the fuck?
The next book I want to talk about is the first book in the Chestnut Springs series. This is Flawless by Elsie Silver, and I didn't know what to expect with this book, but all I can say is it's just cowboys and smut. Cowboys and smut, that's all you get with this book, and I'm so here for it. So obviously this one, the song that has to go with it is Cowboy Like Me by Taylor Swift, just because of the name. That's all I've got for you. And the rating I gave this book was 4 stars, and I'm actually so excited because you might be able to see, oh no you can't, but I have all of the other books in the series, and I'm so excited to read them. The next book is Bunny. Now this one, Bunny by Mona Awad, is a very interesting book. It's definitely a book that gives you the feeling like you are on some very hard drugs and you've just fallen down the rabbit hole. That's the best explanation I can give you. There's not really a plot, it's really just vibes. That's what this book is. And the only song that I can think of that can go with this book is Wonderland by Taylor Swift, because same vibes. I gave this book a 3.5 star simply because I do like a good plot, and I just felt like this one was lacking a little bit in the plot department, and I would have liked a little bit more resolution at the end of the book, and we just didn't really get that. And so 3.5 stars for this one. Very cute cover though. The next book I read was also called Bunny, but this one was by S.E. Tolston. And this book was very different to the last Bunny. It was more of a psychological thriller, very much getting swept up in the Wonderland vibes, but in a very different way. I did really like this one. I actually also gave it 3.5 stars. I'm not a big thriller person in terms of a book. I haven't read a lot of thrillers, so it was very gripping, but it's just not the types of books that I usually read, so I think it was just a little bit harder to get into. I think the song that most reflects this book is Labyrinth by Taylor Swift, because the whole book just feels like a labyrinth. You really don't know what's real and what's not. You just kind of get lost and swept up in the horror of it all, and yeah, you just kind of feel like you're never going to get out of this weird realm of the book. So I also read Fourth Wing this year, just like everyone else, and I actually lent it to a friend, so that's why I don't have it with me, but I really loved it. I actually gave that one 5 stars as well, and I just felt like it took you back to like reading The Hunger Games for the first time, but a little bit of Game of Thrones, a little bit of Harry Potter, just with like the castle and that kind of thing, and I just loved it. I just ate the whole thing up. So yeah, I gave that one 5 stars. And I think the Taylor Swift song that most reminds me of this book is Long Live. And that is simply for the lyrics, I had the time of my life fighting dragons with you. I also read The Force of Nature by Jane Harper. Now this was the first Jane Harper book that I have read. I did see The Dry in cinemas and I really, really loved it. I love anything that gives Australian vibes, so this was really up my alley. I gave this one 4 stars, and I think the Taylor Swift song that most reflects this book is No Body, No Crime, featuring Haim. And that is simply because there was no body. Was there a crime? Did she actually get murdered? Did she not? We don't know. So definitely read this book if you love a little murder mystery. It's probably the only murder mystery that I read this year and I really, really loved it. I also have another book club with a couple of my other friends and we read Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and we read this kind of in the autumn, well, what would have been the American autumn, our spring, and it really is just a little love story that kind of just reminds you of Gilmore Girls fanfiction. That is the best way I can describe it. It was great, but honestly the plot wasn't really good. You're really just there for the fall feelings and the autumn feelings. But yeah, I kind of sped through that book, but I probably wouldn't recommend it or read it again. So I rated that one 2.5 stars. And the Taylor Swift song that I think most reflects that book is Everything Has Changed. And it's simply because once they had met each other, everything had changed. Their whole lives had changed. It kind of revolved around their relationship. And the second last book that I read this year was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And I rated this 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I'm not a huge memoir person, but I think the story of how she was pushed into fame at such a young age and how her relationship with her mother really negatively impacted her later on in life as well, and really impacted the decisions that she made and her why and why she was doing things. So yeah, that's why I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Bloody depressing story, but very, very good. Definitely do recommend. And I think the song that most encapsulates this book is You're on Your Own, Kid, because she had her mum for a very long time, but at the end of the day she was on her own, and that her whole story kind of led to her being okay with being on her own and getting over her traumas and working on herself to the person she is today. And that brings us to the last book that I read this year, so Love Light Farms by B.K. Borison. This is her debut novel. I didn't love it. I think I gave this 2 stars, and there was nothing wrong with it, but I think I need the climax of the book to be high stakes as well. So I've found that in a lot of romance books, if the plot twist or the reason why there is a climax is because that the 2 main characters aren't communicating properly and they would solve everything by just communicating, I don't enjoy the book because it just seems so simple and silly to me. They just go back and forward being like, oh, I don't know what he's thinking, oh, but his actions are confusing, and it's like, if you just communicated and spoke about your feelings, then we wouldn't need this whole book. So I really wanted to like this one, but I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to like it. I found myself halfway through the book just wishing it was over, and it is a really short read, so yeah. Anyway, the Taylor Swift song that I think most reflects this book has to be Christmas Tree Farm in her holiday collection, because this is literally about a Christmas tree farm. And yeah, that's all I have to say. So I think we can all agree that 2023 was the year of Taylor Swift with the Eras tour and all of her re-recordings coming out. So I would love to know, what is your favorite book of this year and what Taylor Swift song do you most relate to that book? I'd love to know. So that wraps up 2023, and I will see you guys in the new year for some new videos. And that wraps up 2023, and I will see you guys in the new year. Hope you have a great new year, and I will
New year.
see ya.